All right, everybody go ahead and get settled.
That's so quiet and serious. You've been called thin-skinned before. You've been called a bully before. Your thoughts?
Well, I think when they say bully, it just means I'm an energetic executive.
Some of the pushback on that topic was connected to the fact that it goes through like grade 12.
We think it's an agenda. We think it's ideology. We're going to focus on math, science, and all these other things. You know, we didn't have that when I was going into school.
You have been through, personal life challenges of your own on the death and on the cancer front.
To have that happen so suddenly, I mean, it was almost like, how could this be?
Running for president, to what extent do you think you should have been more aggressive in attacking him?
He tells me, he's like, you should have attacked me.
Likelihood you would ever take a role in the administration? Your wife tells me I need to give you a hard time about diet today, too.
She is going through all the different stuff about, what's in the food and everything like that, and, so.
She said that doesn't necessarily extend to you yet, but we're working on you.
Although I did, we were at a baseball game recently. They had like some treats, and our kids were there, and they had the nerds, and I said, no nerds, your mom's not going to want you.
Oh, really?
Because the nerds really tested poorly for arsenic.
Right.
So I said, guys, and then, 2 of the 3 were like, that's right, nerds have arsenic, we're not going to do nerds. And, these are kids in elementary school. So, it was pretty good. So it's seeping in.
She said she's still on you, though, about the 8 or 9 p.m. Donuts being brought home.
Oh, gosh, yeah, no, it's...
But she said now you have an excuse because it's diners, drive-ins, and DeSantis.
That's right.
That's so quiet and serious.
I have that power. Everybody comfortable? 90 minutes?
But by the way, another one you should put on your list, the Celebrity Golf Tournament in Lake Tahoe.
I heard that's really good.
Yeah, so those are the 2 that I've kind of gone to.
What time of year is that?
That is July. So I think it's typically like a week or 2 after July 4th.
Okay.
But they have, Pebble used to have a big athlete celebrity.
Yeah, they've dialed that down because of the change in format.
Right. Tahoe doesn't always get all of the big names, but everybody from President Trump to Michael Jordan over the years.
Oh, yeah.
Aaron,
MJ used to play in that a lot.
Right. Aaron Rodgers is there every year.
Yeah.
And so it's like a fun group of...
Yeah, the quarterbacks are usually pretty good players, too. Tony Romo's a really good player. It's just baseball... It's usually the pitchers that are better than the hitters because the baseball swing's a little bit different than the golf swing, so it doesn't fully translate. And then I think the hockey players are all really good because that's similar to a golf. You're hitting the ball with the stick. So pretty much every NHL legend is good in golf like that I've seen.
Yeah, and Romo, I think he'll play 36 holes of golf several days a week, even during the NFL season.
Michael's his club is in Florida, the Grove. He plays 36 a day, 6 days a week.
That doesn't say. Okay. Well, so actually we can start there by talking a little bit about sports. I saw you were at President Trump's college sports, roundtable. Some heavy hitters were there. What's kind of the goal of that?
Well, it was interesting. I was playing golf with the president over the Christmas break, and I was just like, hey, what's up with NIL? Are you going to fix it? He's like, yeah, we should. Will you help me? And so I helped bring together some of the people there. Like
a vice chair.
I'm the vice chair, Randy Levine from the Yankees, the other vice chair. And we've got, I helped bring in Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, Charlie Ward, Condoleezza Rice, a bunch of really good people. Randy knows a lot of people. And so the idea is to just get people at a table, talk. But there's basically a few issues that I think most people could agree on. One, eligibility. You take your first snap at 18, 19, you shouldn't be playing when you're 26. We've got to get some rules there. 2 is the transfer portal. It's like, you get maybe 1 transfer, but how is it like I throw for 300 yards? Hey, coach, I need more money. Okay, gone, I'm by. Or I'm not going to play in the bowl game for this. So limiting that transfer, and then obviously with the compensation, I actually signed one of the first NIL bills in the country because my view is if you're playing and they're selling your jersey, Why should you not be able to profit off that? If a car dealer wants you to sponsor their dealership here in a commercial, who cares? That's devolved, though, into these collectives where it is just pay to play,
right,
and where these guys are going in demanding more money. So now they basically have more ability to demand money and leave than a pro athlete would have. You imagine a pro athlete saying, oh, I'm not going to play in the wild card game. No, I just don't want to. No, it would never happen. So if you just do those three things, I think that fixes 90% of the issues. There are other issues people bring up, how you do broadcasting, how you do the schedule, the bowl games, all that. And I think, but in terms of a package where we can then say, hey, this is what gives you the ability to do it. You got to work it through Congress. They do an antitrust exemption. That would be good. Look, college sports is not uniform throughout the country in terms of how rabid people are. But in the South and in the Midwest, I mean, the football's king. University of Florida, now they lost in the 26 tournament, but they won the basketball tournament in 25. They had a horrible football season, and the fans were not happy, right? It's like basketball champs is great, but this is football country. And so much revolves around that in a way that I think, like, if you're from like New England or some of these other states where the pro sports really dominate, Southeast and Midwest, the college, particularly college football's king.
And the reality is college athletes should be paid, especially when considering before this, the demands for some of these collegiate athletes' schedules were such that they couldn't actually have any other job.
It was ridiculous. I mean,
money.
think about it. You want to just work, you want to work at the library for 4 hours on a Monday night, and you were barred from doing that.
Right.
So we've gone from one extreme to the other, where they were prohibited from even being, had way less rights than the average student, to now where they have more ability to monetize than a pro athlete. I think there's a happy medium there.
Right, I was going to say it has gone a little crazy, but you kind of blame the NCAA because had they appropriately course corrected earlier on, there probably wouldn't be as much of an issue today. What's your gut tell you as to what happens?
So here's what I think would need to happen. You'd need to have, it could be a limited package that goes through Congress and not even have to resolve all these issues, but provide an antitrust exemption and then give college athletics the ability to address eligibility, transfer, and NIL collectives. And if you just did that, I think you would be able to adopt sensible rules, and we could do it. But it does need Congress to act, because if you don't do it, you just don't have the legal authority given some of the court decisions that have been coming down. So my sense would be you have maybe 3 months. If you don't do it within the next 3 months, then people are going to worry about the midterms. The midterms happen, who knows how that dust settles, and then you may have missed your opportunity. So I really think this is the opportunity to do it, and it is going to get worse from here. So see, what's happening is this is having a really negative impact on, quote, non-revenue sports, which is honestly almost all college sports lose money.
Right.
So like Alabama under Nick Saban, they'd bring in $90 million for their football program. They'd spend $30. That's a $60 million profit. Well, a lot of that was not, or some of that was used because, their basketball team made a few million, but anything else lost money. So you subsidize it, you had robust athletics. Well, now the cost of the football programs have doubled or tripled. You don't have the money. They're cutting sports, Olympic sports, women's sports, all these different things. Look, as a college baseball player, we would get a few hundred fans, right? Some SEC schools, they'll pack it, and some schools make money in baseball, but most of them don't. So it really has an impact beyond just football. It has an impact on all these things. And I made the point when we did the roundtable, I was the captain of the Yale baseball team. Had we had NIL there, I wasn't exactly in line to rake in big bucks. It just is what it is, right? But I will tell you, going through, learning how to train, learning how to accept adversity, overcome that, understanding you're going to fail, it teaches you leadership. You're better off from having competed in Division I athletics. And that's true whether you're in football, baseball, whether you're in women's soccer, all these different things. So I think there's value in having great college athletics, far beyond just who's going to end up in the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball. I think these are future leaders of our country.
And frankly, even if you wouldn't have been entitled to big NIL bucks when you were at Yale, the reality is you were putting yourself through school, and any additional money would have helped and made a difference. We're in a state in Florida that has, couple Major League Baseball teams. It's the site of spring training for many teams. You batted .313 over 4 years at Yale. Did you have the desire to go pro at one point in your life?
Of course I did, yeah. But the reality is you start off, take these kids in Little League, and it's like the ones that can make it to Division I, that's like the top 1%, right, to get to college. It's the top 0.01% that could actually make it to the big leagues. I mean, it's just a very arduous thing. That's part of the reason why, I went to Yale, because I was like planning beyond baseball. I wanted to do it. I would have done it if I could have, 100%.
What was the point where you realized that wasn't
just,
in the cards?
when you're, I was an outfielder, I was a good hitter, I had some power, I could steal some bases, but, some of the guys that are like top of the charts, they're hitting way more home runs, or they're doing this, or they're doing that. So it's just kind of, the nature of it. I was a good high school, good college player. I could have toiled in the minor leagues, but in terms of being an everyday big leaguer, that just wasn't going to happen. And so it's interesting. The guy that succeeded me as captain of the Yale baseball team is a guy named Craig Breslow. He's a friend of mine, and he was a left-handed pitcher. And he pitched about 10, 12 years in the big leagues. He's now the general manager of the Boston Red Sox. When I first got elected to Congress, they're like, you got to play on the congressional baseball team. Well, these reporters knew I was friends with Craig, who was, I think, on the Red Sox at the time. And they're just asking me like, well, why didn't you want to play in big leagues like Craig? I'm like, do you think if I was good enough in the big leagues, I'd be in the frickin' U.S. Congress, for Pete's sake? This guy's pitching 2 innings a week. He's making $5 million a year. And I know it's not easy, but that's a pretty good thing. But I did think, kind of as I got out of college and was doing the law school thing, I was interested in doing baseball in kind of a professional executive type of situation.
Oh, you were?
I was, yeah. So that was part of the reason I did law school to begin with. And then I think what happened was 9/11 happened, and that caused me to want to join, the U.S. Navy. But it's always been a passion of mine. It's something that, we do have 2 major league teams, as you said. I think that we're going to see them do better over the years. And the spring training's really good too.
Okay, 2 baseball moments I wanted to toss your way before moving on to other parts of your life. You remember facing Rick Ankiel?
Yeah, he was probably the best high school player in the history of Florida. And he had never lost the game, I don't think. We beat him in the playoffs. But what I remember more about that game was not him pitching. We were up 4 or 5 runs, and he comes to the plate, and he hits probably the farthest ball I've ever seen in person. And so our home field was Dunedin Stadium, which is the Blue Jays spring training stadium. So this is a major league ballpark. And he did it. So then when he got to St. Louis, and he was lighting it up at first on the mound, then he had the yips, and then his career kind of got derailed. Then you hear news, he's going to come back as an outfielder. And a lot of people were snickering at that. This guy was a pitcher. He's not going to be an outfielder. I was like, I don't know. I've seen that guy hit. I was like, he could do it. And then he ended up being a very productive, everyday big leaguer there. And so, yeah, I think in terms of, if you look at his career, and we have A-Rod, we have a lot of good ones, I think he's probably the best.
What was this about wiffle ball and trying to wear out the Taiwanese pitcher?
Ping pong.
Ping pong,
yeah.
Okay.
So we get to the Little League World Series when I'm 12, which, that's 4 teams in the entire United States at the time. We had to win a 13-state Southern Regional that had Texas, Georgia, a lot of good baseball states. And so we advance. And so it's 4 American teams, 4 international teams. Dominican Republic had a really good team, and Chinese Taipei. Now, they were the dominant force in Little League Baseball. Part of the reason is because they didn't exactly abide by the age limitations, and so they had some guys that were 13, 14, whatever.
Could you tell that at the time?
There were a couple guys, and not just with Taiwan, there were a couple guys in some of these other teams. I mean, we faced a guy from California that was throwing 81 miles an hour from 45 feet away. So that would project about 109 from 60 feet, 6 inches. And the dude looked like he was like 17. I think he had chest hair as a supposed 12-year-old. And then Taiwan had some good guys. But what we were doing is the ping pong. So, the view is the, Taiwan, I guess main communist China as well, are very good in ping pong. So we're sitting there challenging these guys. We played ping pong as much as we could. We kind of became friends with them. We couldn't understand a damn thing they were saying, but we did respect them because they had won so much. Back then it was single elimination, so we lost 5-4 to California. California ended up making it against Taiwan. This pitcher, he was on short rest. He was good for a couple innings, and then they ended up winning the World Series again. So, but I'll tell you, those Dominican kids, we played them in the losers bracket. I mean, these kids, like 12-year-old kids, boom, just throwing the ball from the outfield on a rope. I mean, you could tell why Dominican has had so many good players just by watching that Little League team.
So you mentioned the stadium in Dunedin. You grew up in Tampa from, I think, the time you were 6 through the high school. Like, what was that period of your life like?
Well, it's interesting because I look back now, you know, I was really fortunate to be, so Dunedin is just north of Clearwater. It's west of Tampa. And it is the spring training home of the Toronto Blue Jays. And so all those facilities, including the stadium, were owned by the city. So as I was growing up, those are the facilities we used. My high school home field was a major league spring training park. We would go after school when spring training was going on, wait in the stands for the game to end, and then we'd go out and have our practice from like 4 to 6 or whatever. And so I played 4 years in college and never played on a field better than my high school home field. And I don't think there's anyone that could say that. Not very many people could say that. So you had an ability to play. If you liked baseball and you liked sports, you could play year round. You know, I went to the Dunedin High School there, which is, you know, why we got to use the facilities and everything like that. We went to the Little League World Series when I was 12. We liked other sports, like my friends and I, but I would say baseball was #1 by a country mile.
Where do you think the genesis of your work ethic started?
I think sports has a lot to do with it. I believe baseball is a game where if you do put in time on honing these skills, I do think it pays off. If you're a catcher, learning how to move behind the plate, an infielder, whatever, a pitcher, learning how to control the ball, I do think that was something that you did. But I always just believed, okay, I want to do very well. Sports is my passion. Like I was not passionate about academics, but I just felt like I got to do well in school. Like if I have an ability to get an A, I owe it to myself, my parents, everyone, to get the A. So I worked hard.
And you were conscious of that?
I was conscious of that. I was like, I don't want to leave anything on the field in terms of baseball. I want to know that I did as much as I could, but also in terms of academic, I want to do it. I want to put myself in a position to succeed. And so being able to do both of those things simultaneously, you know, really helps you. Then when I get to college, I'm in much tougher academic environment. I'm working all these different jobs to kind of get through. And then, of course, playing baseball, which is kind of a year-round thing because you're training in the fall and then you have your season in the spring. And that was something that you learn to balance, you know, and I graduated magna cum laude from Yale University, which is not easy to do. So then I get to Harvard Law School. And, you know, the lore was, look to your left, look to your right. Many of you aren't going to be here after your first year. It's such a meat grinder. It's so hard, all this other stuff. So I get there my first year of law school. I never had so much time on my hands because I'm going to class, I'm reading the assignments. I'm not playing baseball anymore. I'm not working a job anymore. So after the first semester, I'm like, I got to go get a job. I need to make some money. I need to do all that stuff. But the reason why that was easy for me was because of working, learning how to balance athletics and academics.
I wanted to ask you about your parents. What do you think you learned from your mom?
Well, I think if you look at where my parents are from, so my mom's from Youngstown, Ohio, and my dad's from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, which is western Pennsylvania. Those are steel mill towns. So the Youngstown plant closed in like the late 70s. Aliquippa was probably in the early 80s, but my dad's dad worked in that steel mill. But so this is like blue collar, working class, salt of the earth. And so like my mom was a nurse. And I would go, because I didn't have my own car, I would drive her to the hospital, 6 in the morning, I'd go to school, I'd do that, I'd come pick out, but she's working these 12-hour shifts often, and oftentimes a lot longer than that, and doing very well. But the one thing I always remembered is people in the community, when they knew if they had been in the hospital and she attended to them, they would always tell me how great she was, you know, to do that. But it was a lot of hard work, and it's very exhausting when you're in kind of she was doing critical care, high intensity, on your feet for a long period of time. And so I definitely think work ethic and, you know, commitment to the task at hand.
What about your dad?
Well, I think he was in the Western Pennsylvania and kind of the steel mill. That was that family, right? So similar blue collar.
Were you closer to one or the other?
No, not really.
Okay.
But I think he really kind of taught me about baseball, about sports, about some of the things that became my passions over the years. Like he was very supportive of me, like collecting baseball cards in like the 1980s. And I always tell people, for those who know about baseball cards, they started overproducing them. So I'm getting all these 86 Topps baseball, which are now worth nothing. I got so many of them. Had I gotten 86 Fleer basketball with Michael Jordan's rookie, I would be sitting on a gold mine if I was doing it, but I wasn't doing it that way. So that was kind of learning about baseball, learning about sports, learning about those things.
You still have the baseball cards?
It's interesting. My parents may have them because we had all these different ones. Now my kids have gotten involved in collecting. They like WWE wrestling cards, but it's a much different environment now. Then you could get a pack of cards for $25 that had a stick of gum in it, or 25 cents had a stick of gum. Now, you buy a box of WWE cards, it's like $250. There's an autograph card, there's all this other stuff. So these kids, my kids would be, hey, let's go to the card shop. I'm like, it's expensive to go to the card shop now. It used to be I could spend $5-10 and whatever. The hobby has changed.
I'm sure when you were deciding on where to go to college, you could have gone to a place that would have cost less money, but you, I'm sure very intentionally, chose Yale. Why, and what did kind of paying your way through entail for you?
Well, first of all, to give them credit, I mean, they provided really generous financial assistance, including really significant scholarship grants. So it made it doable based on kind of my family circumstances. Well, here's the thing. I didn't know anything about New England. I had never been to New England in my life until I went on my recruiting trip to Yale. I didn't know colleges were liberal. I didn't know anything about politics. I just knew that schools like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, that meant something.
Right.
Like if you do that, then that must mean that you're pretty smart. So I viewed that as a way, like, hey, if I can make it here and I can do well academically here, then I'm going to have some opportunities, in life. And obviously, I was very much into the baseball and all that. But even beyond that, I think I saw the value in being able to do it. And some of those schools, I know things have changed since then. Like when I was there's value kind of in what you learn, but I think there's a lot of value in who you meet. You end up developing relationships. Most of my friends that I either played baseball with, fraternity, whatever, they've been very successful. I mean, almost all of them have been very successful in life. And that's just something that, I don't know. If I had gone somewhere else, would I have had the same thing? Maybe not.
Well, and funny enough, I think it was even going back to your first congressional fundraising campaign. I think it was 40 of your Yale buddies each donate.
Okay, yeah, so that story. Well, we did, I'm running for Congress. Nobody knows who I am, and I have no campaign money to start. And I have 6 months between the day I announced and the primary. So these guys are like, oh, you got to do it, you got to run. So I'm doing it. And I didn't know what I was doing. So we do a fundraiser in New York City where all these guys fly, and some of them were in the area. And we're sitting around the table, and they probably raised 30, 40 grand, which at that time, was kind of and it's limited in how much people can give. I mean, right. I think people could give $2,000 or $2,500. And so my wife, they're like, Casey, why don't you introduce Ron? So, and she's like very, passionate and committed. So she's introducing me and basically gives my speech better than I could give it. And she turns it over to me. And I'm like, I don't know that I can top that. I don't know that I have anything to answer. But it just kind of taught me a lesson, both with her and then honestly with Lou Holtz passing away. I spoke after Lou Holtz one time at a fundraiser that he headlined for me. I never made that mistake again because you just can't top it. But yeah, so those guys were doing it. They were there helping, and but those are just the relationships that you build over the years.
But you were kind of when you first went to Yale, your buddy Mike, who I was talking to yesterday, who was a quarterback from California, he's like, Ron was had his jean shorts and product-filled spiky hair, and we both didn't know what the hell was going on.
So think about it. I'm a public school kid from West Central Florida. First day of school, I have flip-flops, jean shorts, and a cutoff T-shirt on. That is like a fish out of water up there, right? It was a different culture. And I kind of felt like people like me were viewed a little less favorably than had I come from a different culture. I think
Did you actually feel that
I
then?
felt I mean, not that like, oh, I'm a victim. No,
Yeah,
not a victim. But
right.
it was, I think people back then, like, oh, you're from Florida. The only thing they knew was Miami and Palm Beach, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I told them I'm from Dunedin, what the hell's that? Where's that? Oh, it's the Tampa. Oh, all this stuff.
Well, and there's a lot of generational wealth. And
For sure, yeah. So it's
all
just
that
it's just
right.
a different thing, and just the culture is different. The weather, honestly, was a big difference. I played sports year round. Obviously, Mike could do it in Southern California year round. I get to Yale, and it's nice in September for a certain period of time. We're playing fall ball, then all of a sudden, it starts getting dark at 4:30, in the afternoon, and it's dreary and rainy and all this stuff. And it was not. So I'm just like, you know what? I liked where I grew up. It was kind of so it made me appreciate that a little bit more. But yes, it was. I was totally a fish out of water. I did not know what to expect. And the culture was just different. Like I learned to adapt to it, and I have a lot of friendships. But in terms of the people that I'm friends with to this day, most of them were people that had kind of similar backgrounds as me, right? They're playing football, playing baseball, playing some of these sports, and maybe went to kind of more normal high schools. Because you'll have there'll be people at Harvard and Yale who have like 10 of their high school classmates with them. I think I was the first one from my high school to ever go to Yale, or certainly one of the few, right? But so it's just different in terms of that class makeup.
And despite the liberal environment, you felt you were actually more conservative by the time you left.
So it's interesting. So as I said, I didn't know colleges were liberal.
Yeah.
Where I grew up, I didn't even know who was a Republican or a Democrat. Like the kids I played baseball with, their families, all this stuff, I had no idea. But I had never been exposed to like anti-Americanism, some of the anti-religion, anti-God, anti-Christian. That just, you would not do that whether you're Republican or Democrat. Well, I get there, and I mean, it's very high, like, oh, the United States, they caused the Cold War, they did this, and I'm just thinking, well, that's not true, right? Because I'm here in the late 90s, so the fall of the Soviet Union was still kind of fresh in everybody's thinking, so you're seeing that. But I think parents worry, like conservative parents are like, I don't want to send my kid and have them undo 18 years because it's so liberal. I can just tell you with me, it had the opposite effect because I started to think about this stuff more critically, and I'm like, you know what, that's not right. That's ideology. Those are narratives that they're trying to push. Here's the truth. So I developed it, and then by the time I got to Harvard Law School, I was set kind of in my ways. So when I'm doing that first congressional campaign in Florida, I'm running, I had Navy, I had, my wife's pretty, we had a lot going for us. But I had Harvard and Yale, which are scarlet letters in a Republican primary, because our voters think this guy may be very liberal. And what I would tell people is, we're so sick of sending people to Washington and they become part of the DC culture and they go native up there. How do you know I'm not going to do it? Well, here's why. I'm the only person in this country that went through both Harvard and Yale and came out more conservative than we went in. And then they were fine with it.
By the way, I was told I have to ask you about TJ Tucker's Wednesday nights, dollar beers and karaoke. I'm told that you don't know a video exists of your Hank Williams Jr. Karaoke.
Well, I hope there's no video that exists. That was the one thing. I mean, imagine
a country boy can't survive.
Imagine having the cameras back then. But and the one I was really good at were the Johnny Cash songs, because he didn't really have his voice never went high, so you could kind of just go low and you can kind of work your way through it without totally embarrassing yourself. But yeah, no, we had a lot of fun.
Did I read this correctly that A Few Good Men actually impacted your military interest?
Well, so it's interesting. So back in the day, I was known to do the Colonel Jessup impression and Jack Nicholson. And so people would like when I was being hazed in the fraternity, they would make me do it right in front of other, oh yeah. So I'm like sitting, literally, I think I'm on a street corner at Yale, and I'm sitting there and people are looking at me and I'm just like, you want me on that one? You got to do it to this guy, whatever. So we kind of did it. So it was, because that was in probably the early 90s, but it's interesting. I identified more with the prosecutor than I did with Cruz. I mean, I thought he was kind of a smartass, going in there. And, to a certain extent, Jessup's right. You come down here in your white uniform and all this stuff, extend me some courtesy, right? So I really wasn't, but I liked a good bit, but it was really the impression that people knew me for.
Yeah, the First Lady, when I was talking to her yesterday, was telling me how, when you were in Iraq, she was always told by you that you were on, the military base. And she's like, when in reality, he was in helicopters and, flying all around. How about your most vivid memory from your time there?
So I think the most vivid memory was we were, just me personally, not in terms of the unit's success, right, but me personally we were in theater when the Marines introduced the MV-22 Osprey. So the Osprey is kind of like a hybrid between a fixed wing and a rotary wing. So it can take off like this, it can go and take off like that, it can go higher, whatever. Actually pretty cool. Horrible training record, right? So I'm just going, because we get in a Black Hawk, we do whatever. Well, I'm going and the air guy's just like, you're going to be one of the first guys to be on the MV-22 Osprey in theater. I'm like, really? Like, what's that? They're like, oh, well, it did this. And so I just remember, like, this was like this flight with this platform that these guys are saying did not do well in the training. And so I get in there and I just don't know what to think. But like the rest of the time, we'd be like coming in Black Hawks in the middle of Baghdad, or we'd be out in El Asad or in Ramadi and all these. You don't even think about it. This one, though, because they were pumping me with all this stuff, I'm thinking like, okay, we get in it. And honestly, it was pretty cool. I mean, it went off very quickly. It got very high, much higher than the typical helicopter, and it landed well. But I just remember we were the ones who were kind of debuting that because we were in the Marine Corps battle space, and I think it performed well over there.
All right, so you're 27 years old, a JAG with the Navy, Guantanamo Bay. And I know, there have been stories about this, reporters always looking for something, but that also had to be such a fascinating experience to be there at kind of that stage in your life.
Yeah, and anytime anyone said anything, like, I saw nothing that was anything other than 100% professional. Yeah. Sometimes they'll act like I was in. I mean, I wasn't doing, but like the people that were there a lot longer than me, because I was doing temporary stints over there. Very professional.
What's that like, though?
Well, what it was like, what it showed me was the narrative that was out in legacy media was not what consistent with the facts on the ground. Legacy media was saying people are going to Guantanamo, they're being tortured, they're being this. I went in, and because we had Khalid Sheikh came in when I was down there. You go in, it's a maximum security prison. If you were in a Supermax versus there, you wouldn't know the difference. They were being treated, he was in solitary confinement, but you know what? There's people that didn't do as bad of things as he's done as solitary confinement. So he was doing that. So these guys are doing it. I felt that they were being treated very unfairly because it was the narrative, right? That was being used. They wanted to use it against Bush, use it against the war, all that stuff. I get the politics of it. But we would have people go down there from like these European countries. And these guys would tell us, they're like, this is not what we've been told that it is. It's a very secure environment. Would you want them in the mainland of the United States? No, for a variety of reasons. So you were able to do it. So what I saw is a lot of people doing their duty. It was a difficult situation, but there were various gradations of security, Khalid Sheikh maximum. Some of these other guys that ended up getting released, they're just playing soccer all day in like kind of an open field situation where they have more minimal security. So that's just what you saw. I was like, okay, how can the New York Times be saying this when this is what I'm seeing? And then I saw the same thing when I was in Iraq. How could Washington Post be writing this when I'm watching that did not happen the way they said? And so that really opened my eyes about how different the narrative can be to the actual reality.
Were the stories about feces or urine getting thrown on you, stuff like that?
Well, look, there was one detainee that was, he was not cooperative. I wasn't like manhandling him, but he threw, something not nice. I mean, but that's just the way it goes, right?
How does an experience there, impact you?
Well, it's interesting. It kind of goes back to why I joined in the first place. I mean, you grew up in the 80s were kind of like the height of us getting ready to win the Cold War, like Rocky IV, all this stuff, right? Then the Berlin Wall falls, then the Soviet Union. And the 90s were like a great time to be going to high school and college, and I graduate Yale right before, the spring before 9/11. It's like we didn't have a care in the world as a country. Like we were in such good shape. And then they run planes into those two, and the Pentagon, but the Twin Towers, and it just changed everything about how I viewed the world and what I felt I needed to do to be.
How so?
Well, I mean, nobody was thinking that we had any real significant threats when the Cold War ended, right? People were saying it's a new world, we're now on a holiday from history, all this other stuff. And you have a handful of terrorists can do this. It just showed vulnerability. A lot of innocent people, of course, lost their lives in that. So to see some of those people in Gitmo getting justice as best as our government was able to deliver it at the time, I was glad to see Khalid Sheikh Mohammed there. He deserved that. He deserved a lot worse than that because those people harmed a lot of Americans, and these were innocent people. And I've grown to know people now, because we've done a lot with 9/11 curriculum in Florida. We actually have mandatory curriculum in our schools where kids need to learn about 9/11, what caused it, all such stuff. So I'm friends now with a lot of the widows. We were up at Ground Zero a couple years ago. I was there with them doing different things. And so it just had an impact on me, but seeing that in Gitmo and then thinking back that, hey, these guys, certainly Khalid Sheikh, these guys were behind the worst terrorist attack against our country, and we're doing something about it.
Ivy League education, you could have come out and done just about anything you wanted. How do you avoid the draw then to a high-paying job in favor of what you were just talking about?
I just, it's just like I felt that the world had changed, our country was in a different spot, and I needed to do my part as best I could. It was funny though, at Harvard Law School, you have 550 students in a class, they have like 3,000 employers come. Every hedge fund recruits there, private equity, corporate law firms, I mean, you name it, there's a whole gamut of stuff that you could potentially do. And people would ask me, what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing the military. What? It was like, what? Like it was just like, it didn't compute as to why you'd want to do it. But I felt it was a duty, and I felt that I needed to do it. My grandfather fought in World War II. It's just something that I believed in. And so we ended up doing, I didn't get my school paid for. You could have done a program to do that. But by the time I was commissioned, I just did it. So we did it.
Why?
Well, it was just, it was not in the timing of when I joined and everything like that.
Okay.
But so people are like, oh, well, at least they pay for your school. No, I didn't pay for my school. No, I went in, I had to pay loans when I got in as an ensign. You're not exactly raking in big bucks back then, but it is what it is. But you know what? I mean, that taught me a lot about being a leader. It taught me about service above self. It taught me even more about discipline than what I had with baseball and athletics. And so it was the right decision for me.
You remember Beef O'Brady's?
Oh man, so I'm a lieutenant junior grade in the Navy, stationed in Mayport, Florida, which is northeastern Florida. And I'm done with baseball. My buddies were done with baseball. A lot of us started to get into golf. So we had a trip planned in 2 weeks from the time to Bethpage Black in Long Island, which people that know golf, it's hosted the US Open, just hosted the Ryder Cup, but it's a public course and one of the most difficult courses. And so I'm on base that day, and midway through the morning, something hits me and I feel like crap. And my officer in charge is like, you look like shit. And I'm like, well, he's like, just go home and relax. I mean, just sleep it off and come back tomorrow. So I go back and I just pass out on my couch. And one of my friends calls me. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm not feeling. He's like, you better get your butt to the range because Bethpage is going to eat your lunch if you don't. So I got up, put on my golf stuff, went to the local driving range, a mile or two from my apartment. And I'm sitting there, and there's a bay with half of the balls missing. Someone left, and then there's another bay where there's this young girl that's in this beautiful golf outfit, very pretty, and she's whacking balls. And she had a good swing, but she wasn't really hitting them great, but I could tell she had good athleticism. So I'm just like hitting, and I'm like watching her, just trying to figure out like, what do I do, right? And I'm like, you know what? You're never going to hit a pitch if you don't swing at it, right? So you just take the swing. So we started talking, kind of negotiated over those balls. I think she kind of thought I was okay, but I think I liked her better than she liked me. So, but we started that. We split the rest of the balls. We just started talking. I'm like, hey, why don't we go grab? So.
That was a piece of the story I had not heard that you actually, the first date was kind of that.
Well, so here's the thing though. So I'm like, let's just go grab a bite to eat, let's grab a beer, whatever. This was before smartphones. This is 2006. So we had flip phones, and I get in my truck, she gets in her car. I'm like, follow me. I didn't know where the hell I was going, right? I was pretty new to that area. I had just gotten in duty 6 months earlier. So I'm going, and I'm like, just follow me. And I'm like, oh, please don't lose her. Please don't lose her. Going, the first thing I see is a Beef O'Brady's. So I do like a massive turn in there. So we're sitting in Beef O'Brady's for kind of our first official date. And then we ended up just continuing, and kind of the rest is history.
Do you remember when you're in Iraq, calling in on Valentine's Day?
Oh man, so the communications then is not what it is now, right? So to be able to call back home was a big deal. They didn't have FaceTime, they didn't have any of this stuff. So we had these satellite phones, and so they'd let people use called the satellite phone. So I got someone on her show reached out to me. He's like, hey, will you call her? I was like, yeah, I'll do it. What time? And I don't know, the time's a lot different, so we did it. So I'm calling in, and I couldn't see what was going on because I'm just doing it, but I could tell she was shocked. She had no idea that was coming. And I'm just like, yeah, I just want to wish you a happy Valentine's Day. Love you. Look forward to seeing you soon, or whatever. And that was definitely.
She said she didn't know what to do, so she starts like kind of grilling you on.
Well, she
on
was
air.
like, yeah. She's like, he's in, and she started saying like he's in Western Iraq. I think he's in. I'm like, don't say the location. You're not supposed to do it, but it was fine. But it was innocent. And so we did that, and then it's interesting. My other kind of involvement with her in local news was
because she was kind of a star. Local
she was a
news
star, yeah.
reporter
She was a
then.
legitimate
Yeah.
star. We would go out, and people in Northeast Florida, I mean, they definitely knew her. And she would be in celebrity golf tournaments, all this stuff. She said, pick my wedding dress. So they would show these different wedding dresses for like 2 months leading into the wedding, like vote on this wedding dress, vote on this. So it was like our wedding was like a thing. Nobody knew who I was at the time. I was just the guy in the white uniform, right? But that she was really well known. So they ended up doing it, and I think they picked the one that she was going to wear. But she told me, she's like, I already know which one I'm going to wear, and so we ended up doing that.
So there's, as I understand it, she kind of served as like the marketing manager for your first book, which preceded you being in Congress. But the relationship between the two of you on the personal and professional front seems to be kind of second to none. Like, when there's an issue that comes up that you're dealing with, or like a policy making type decision you're thinking through, like, what's the dialogue that you have with somebody like that?
Well, I think it's just she is very supportive, right? I mean, she's never come to me and said, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. Now, part of that is I think that she views that as the appropriate function, and to not inject herself more so like as a spouse, but I think also is she's a true believer. A lot of Republicans will see, oh, this guy will be running, he'll say all these good things, and then they worry about the spouse pulling them left, right?
She said she was a Republican when you guys met, but that you made her a conservative.
Yeah, well, here's the thing.
I mean, not like made her, but
Well,
right.
she really, because she studied economics and French at College of Charleston. Nothing wrong with that, but she wasn't reading the Federalist Papers, just not was the course of study, right? So she kind of learned. But the thing is they're like, oh, the spouses pull them left, all this stuff. I can tell you, that is not true with her for sure. I mean, she's not. But I think it's more of just supporting the mission, wanting to be successful. And then, as running for Congress is one thing. You get there, and I worked really hard, and my constituents like me, and I got reelected with big margins and everything like that. But how much impact do you really have on people's lives? As governor, you have huge impact on people's lives. I mean, especially with COVID, she's had a huge impact on people's lives. And so to be able to be doing things that are going to be meaningful to people, that makes a big difference. And she really takes her ability and the position she's in seriously to say, how could I help do things? And she's launched a lot of very successful initiatives.
When it's funny, when I was talking to her about this yesterday on the phone, she was very quick to say, this is you making the decisions, you doing the work. And I'm like, I get that, but I mean, man, you could be so lucky to have a partner in life that you trust explicitly, whose opinion you value. Like, that is a huge net positive.
I mean, she's kind of selling herself short, but if I'm negotiating like an education package, she's not injecting in that. Like, I handle it, I got elected, whatever. But on her initiatives, where I say, you know what, so she had breast cancer, she fought it, we went public with it because we just felt that we owed it to the people, but she was an inspiration for a lot of people. She's now driven support from the legislature for new cancer initiatives. We were just at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville because of the Casey DeSantis cancer innovation. They're now doing the first carbon ion cancer therapy in the entire Western Hemisphere is going to be in Jacksonville in Florida because of what she did to move the ball forward. She's done in a whole host of other areas where child welfare, food testing, all these different things. That's not me doing it and then her taking, that's her doing the difficult work to be able to bring all this stuff to fruition. And she does it, she gets paid $0 to do it, never gotten anything for anything she's ever done. It's purely because she believes in the mission.
Why do you think the relationship works between you guys?
I mean, it's interesting. When I met her, I think we had a lot of similarities. I mean, she was from Ohio, my mom was from Ohio, so we had kind of family similarities. We were both interested in a lot of the same things. She was playing a lot of golf. We met on the driving range. We would play golf together on kind of going on dates and stuff. And look, for a guy, it's like, it's a lot easier, for me to be taking her there than to take her to like a ballet, which is just not my cup of tea. I just don't know as much about it. Golf was good, and she was good, and she was passionate about it. And we had battles over the years, good-natured battles. Well, sometimes good-natured, but so you do that. So I just think a lot of it clicked with us. And then she's just been somebody that when we're doing some of the stuff we're doing now, I mean, she just believes in the mission. And, it's like you could click on a personal level with somebody, as a spouse, but maybe professionally, they're just not in the same place as you. I think for us, we click personally, obviously emotionally, but then the stuff I've gotten involved in, there are things that's things she believes in too.
I want to toss your way some of kind of your most, it's at least publicly viewed or media viewed kind of controversial items, and just kind of get your thoughts on them. Don't say gay. What do you think critics or somebody who, would say, I don't agree with that, what do you think they miss in?
Well, obviously, I mean, the whole name of it is a joke. Is there anybody being, prosecuted or held? No, of course not. You could say whatever you want in Florida. So I think that was an example of narrative. And part of it was 2021, I think when that happened, that was peak woke era. So that was an issue where, the transgenderism, all that stuff was something that people were pushing in a public way and in education. And then because Biden was president, a lot of the left, obviously, they didn't have Trump to go after. So I was like the guy, what we're doing in Florida, because we had gone against the grain in COVID and done all that. And I was for the left, public enemy number one. So I think part of it was...
Which, by the way, there was, certainly stuff that I've disagreed with over the years, but history proved your decisions on COVID right.
And they were very unpopular at the time, certainly with the media.
And I'm going to talk to you about that.
But I think on the gender ideology, it's like, if a parent sends their kid to school, particularly in the elementary grades, why should they be told, you could change your gender? It's inappropriate, right? And we don't even deal with gender ideology. We just don't think it's appropriate to be in at all. And I think most parents agreed with us on that. And so we did it. It got a lot of play because there was pressure on Disney to speak out and to oppose the parents' rights bill. And in Florida, when Disney weighs in, historically, that's the end of it, right? They are the 800-pound gorilla historically in Florida politics. I was in a position, I had very young kids. I get like the atmospherics that were happening, but we had to do what was right for parents. And so I think that was portrayed in a way that obviously was not what we were doing, but I think there was a political agenda behind it. But here's the thing, we did that, our parents are happy. As a parent, you're free to instill whatever values you want into your kid, absolutely. But in terms of our tax dollars, we don't want to be in a situation where parents, which is the majority of them, are being in a situation where they're having an agenda imposed.
Some of the pushback on that topic was connected to the fact that it extends beyond, third grade and goes through like grade 12.
Well, it started, the first
curriculum.
bill, I think, started with the elementary, and then I think the legislature's view was, we've looked at this stuff, we think it's an agenda, we think it's ideology, we're going to focus on math, science, and all these other things. We didn't have that when I was going into school, and I think they made a decision on that. But the initial controversy was over the K through 4 grades when you had that all go public.
With it going through 12th grade, how do you feel about that?
I think it's been fine. I mean, I don't think there's been an issue with anything. Again, people are free to do what they want to do, but in terms of what is our curriculum going to be, I think what we found, and this is true with a lot of curriculum, there's just a desire to make an agenda in education. So for example, we go through textbooks. And if there's an agenda, we object to it. And we're a big enough state that if we don't accept the textbook, that's a big problem for the company, so they have to make changes. And it's amazing to see some of the stuff. It's like, when I was in school, I didn't feel like anyone was pushing anything on me. We'd study American history, we'd study social sciences, we'd study these things, and it was pretty straightforward. People could have their opinions, but it wasn't slanted. So I think what we've done in a whole host of issues, not just this, is let's not have slanted education. Let's do the basics and do the basics well.
I get third grade, you don't want, stuff like that kind of being taught. But, somebody's in high school, one could make the strong argument that learning about some of that better kind of prepares.
Here's I think the problem we've seen. So this is a case that just went to the Supreme Court, California. So they do the gender ideology, they do it very strongly, and they're doing things where these kids are then choosing, to transition, and the high schools won't tell the parents that this is happening. So that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, California can't do that violates the rights of the parents. And so I get people, I think, do get different things that come in beyond just what they learn in school. But to have the power of the schools pushing that agenda in that way that goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, it's like, is that really what we want to be doing in our school system? So we're saying math, science, history, all the basics. Let's do those well, and let's not try to do things, because 2 + 2 is 4, right? I don't care what parent you are, it is what it is. Right. Some of this other stuff, I think, it's just much more, divisive and controversial.
So in your opinion, it just becomes kind of a slippery slope?
I think so, yeah.
What's your reflection on you mentioned Disney, on how that all shook out?
So first, just signing the bill, most people thought I wouldn't go through with it once they came out, because they've been the most powerful force in Florida.
And you guys got married at Disney, so it's not as
how
if
odd is
you don't
that?
have
That's
an
not anything
affinity
we
for-
ever hid, but
Right.
when this was going on, people didn't draw the connection to it, and eventually that kind of came out. And that was her family was big into it, everything like that, and I had a good relationship with them. Remember, they were open during COVID in Florida. They were closed in California. So we saved a lot of jobs. We helped the company a lot. And I didn't do it because I was trying to help the company. I did it because I cared about the cast members being able to work. And I cared about Floridians and others being able to have fun with their kids. I wanted life to resume normalcy. So you go back to May, June of 2020, Universal, SeaWorld, Disney, and then in California, Universal, SeaWorld, Disney closed there. So we had a very good relationship. And I told the then CEO, I said, don't get involved in this. Because first of all, what they were saying—
Bob Chapek, yeah.
Because what they were saying about it wasn't true, and it became a political football. I'm like, don't worry about it. And so, they did, so we fought, we won. But then what happened, they doubled down. They said, we are going to launch legal action against this law. We're going to try to get it reversed in the legislature, in the courts, or whatever. It's like, okay, well, first of all, is that really your fiduciary obligation to your shareholders? I don't know, but fine, you do you. But what I also know is they had an arrangement in Florida that no other company had. They were given control of the local government back in the late 60s to be able to create Disney and all that, which made sense at the time. But what was promised was that they were going to build residential communities in addition to the parks. What does that mean? Those people would vote in the leaders of the local government. Disney never did that. So basically, they have controlled this entire local government there for decades. So there's other tenant businesses. Disney could tax them and then use it for Disney stuff. So what we did is we said, okay, you're free to launch a tax against our parents' rights bill. You're free to do that, but we're not going to subsidize that. And so we imposed the state control board over that local government. And what did my guys do? They cut the taxes on all the other businesses. They're making sure that basically Disney's treated the same. Because think about it, they didn't have to go through the same things that Universal has to go through, SeaWorld. So they had a very special arrangement, which I think had outlived its usefulness, but they were just so powerful over the years that no one dared to touch that, even though it came under a lot of criticism. It's interesting. Liberal media would always criticize that they had this special arrangement. And because, it's like the Republicans control the legislature, the liberals don't. The minute I took it away, then the media flipped and they're like, oh, this governor's doing all this stuff. Why is he doing this, all this stuff? They all said for years that this was inappropriate. So we did the control board and then did it. Now people said, oh, you're taking away their control. Again, this is a local government they're controlling. They can do what they want for their company, but this is the local government. Disney's going to leave. They should leave Florida, all this stuff. Well, what are you going to do? Move Space Mountain to Columbus, Ohio? Maybe St. Louis, right? But no, it's not going to happen.
I mean, good relationship for everybody. I mean, they employ 75,000 Floridians or whatever it is, bringing in billions of...
But so if we did all that, they're investing $18 billion into their Orlando parks. And I will say, the controversy was more between Florida and Burbank. Not between the people that are in Orlando. We have a good relationship with them. I think they do a good job. And it's interesting, there was one day where they were staging protests about whatever was going on in Florida at the time. And Burbank had this big walkout. Orlando, the local news was trying to cover it. They had helicopters. There was one guy out there with a sign with a mask on. That was their whole protest in Orlando. And I think the reason is because a lot of them didn't appreciate what Burbank was doing and appreciated that Florida had protected their jobs and livelihoods during COVID.
Wasn't the whole thing something that, like, you guys in Disney should have just figured out behind closed doors?
Well, we tried that. I mean, remember, we tried to just say, because the idea is just let it ride. Yeah. You'll get criticized for 48 hours, and then the mob will go somewhere else. And that's not. I've had that conversation with other CEOs, because what happens is, because they've tried to attack companies that give to our school choice program, because a parent will take it to a religious school that may have traditional values that they don't like, right? So they'll attack them. And I said, guys, listen, if you bend the knee, they know they got you. They're going to come back, and whatever you do, they're going to try to get a pound of flesh. If you tell them to pound sand, they're going to attack you for a day, for 2 days, and then they're going to move on to the next target, and they are never going to come after you again. And I think that that's been true. So I think Disney made a mistake by bending to really, it was a woke mob, right? The average cast member in Orlando was not up in arms about this. It really was that. But that was the first time that anybody on the conservative side stood up against corporate wokeness. Because I think these CEOs had the view, hey, I just need to placate the far left and this woke mob. I know that on the right, that they're not, so I can go as far left as I want and never have any blowback. And I think when we did that, and I think we had good reasons to do what we did, that reverberated throughout the country, certainly in corporate America. So now CEOs could go to their board and say, listen, I don't want to end up, like Disney did on this. We need to stay out of this stuff. I mean, you remember during that era, Major League Baseball moved the All-Star game out of Atlanta and put it in Colorado because Georgia was doing election integrity bill, which they said, oh, it's going to be like Jim Crow. Turns out that the next election you had the highest black turnout that they've ever had. So it was all a fake narrative, but there was a lot of policy being done based on these narratives. And so we look back now, of course they shouldn't have moved the All-Star game, right?
Two other kind of items are just on the issue front I wanted to toss your way. The transporting immigrants to Democratic states, notably, what went on with
Martha's Vineyard. Yeah. So here's the thing. Biden opened the border. I think most people, even a lot of Democrats, agree that was a big mistake, right? Because you have 10 million people. We don't know who these people are. And I get some of the businesses want cheap labor, but that's not in the best interest of the United States. So I sent people to the southern border. I was the first state to help Texas. Reality is you're limited in what you can do in that situation if the feds are not going to be supportive. So Biden was literally flying people. He was flying people into Florida. Let's just be clear. He would find people in foreign countries. They would sign up through this app, and then he would fly them into the United States. And I think it was frustrating because it was putting a lot of stress on communities. It's obviously not consistent with the rule of law. I mean, I don't care if you want a lot of immigration, no immigration. We don't want people pouring in illegally. I think everyone can agree with that. So, but how do you get traction on it? And as our view is that the power centers that were more supportive of the policy were in a position they weren't having to deal with the effects of the policy. Some little town in South Texas, they're getting overrun. Some of these others are not. So you had Texas as well, sending to New York City, Chicago. Our thing with Martha's Vineyard was we knew it would be a very sharp contrast. And I didn't know how they were going to react, right? So we did it after Labor Day, so the season had ended. And so they went in, and this was all voluntary. They signed forms, whatever, saying that they wanted to go to Martha's Vineyard. And so they went. They called out the National Guard. They got them off the island the next day. And so I think that showed a lot of people, well, wait a minute. That milieu up there, they're supportive of this. They literally, Martha's Vineyard had an office in their downtown that said, Refugee Welcome Center, nobody is illegal. They had those signs there. I don't think they ever serviced a single person, but that was what was done. So it was an ideological thing, they were doing it, but the minute they had to deal with any of the fallout from it, you did. That did change the narrative on that. Some of the other cities too, but the Martha's Vineyard thing. And I would say if you look in the 2024 election cycle, economy, but border was very close as the number 2 issue.
There is some comedy connected to the fact that you have these Democratic areas which never had to kind of deal with illegal immigration, where all of a sudden you're kind of forcing their hand and giving them kind of exposure to it. On the other hand, it's like, well, the reality is, these immigrants are the kind of unintended consequence of that.
Well, it's interesting though, a lot of them, because this was done, the legislature passed money to do the transport. It was contracted out with a company that handled it. And those folks that went to Martha's Vineyard, a lot of them were saying, thank you for sending us to Martha's Vineyard. Because they had a brochure about it, the company said, hey, you can go to these places. And they were like, oh, this is great that we're here. They were upset that they got put off the island, but they were glad that they had an opportunity to do that because of where they were before that. So this idea that somehow it wasn't good, this was a place that was advertising itself as a sanctuary jurisdiction, very wealthy. I mean, one of the wealthiest enclaves in the United States. After the season had ended, they had plenty of housing and everything. And so it gave them actually a better opportunity than now. Of course, if Biden would enforce the law, it would have never come to that.
And your goal with it was really to bring attention, because then you thought that was the best way that was going to lead to positive policy change.
And I think that got a lot of play. I mean, that was a really kind of a big, but then people start talking about the border, and they start talking about the number of people, and you started to do all that stuff. But I do think it's when you have a policy that you support that is having thousands overrun these small, poor towns in Texas, you can't even accommodate 50 of them post-season in one of the wealthiest enclaves. It just shows that these are policies that are detached from the consequences. The people that advocated them weren't having to deal with the consequences.
What do you say to somebody who's pro-choice and under no circumstances could kind of identify with kind of your view on abortion rights and kind of the tightening down of restrictions there?
Well, listen, I mean, do you think it's a life or do you not? I mean, that's a threshold question you just have to answer as a moral, philosophical, and ultimately legal issue. And so, if you have an unborn child with a detectable heartbeat, is that a separate life? Or is it the same as just like if I had like a growth on my body that you'd get away? And I think that when you see that, you see this DNA, you see the heartbeat, it's a separate life. I think we have a responsibility to treat it that way, regardless of how popular that would be, regardless of all that. And I understand, I mean, when you're in a situation, I mean, we were married, but when Casey got pregnant, it's just a big deal, right? I mean, it's a huge deal for obviously the mother. It's a huge deal. Well, some fathers don't put a lot of stock into it these days, but they should, right? I mean, it should be a really big deal. You have a lot of women who are very vulnerable situations. How are you going to raise? How are you going to afford this? So all of those things are things that I very much sympathize with, and I understand it's not always the easiest situation. But I also just have to make a judgment as a threshold matter. Is this a life that's worth protecting? Is it a life at all? And then if so, what legal protections should go? And I would note, Florida, we have reduced abortion probably by about 50% in the last few years. But we had a very high rate prior to this. And so, but I think one thing I don't like is it being used as a form of birth control. And I think that's what's happened over the years. That's become part of the culture. We would prefer that obviously not be the case, because we do think that the unborn child has potential and has life. But I understand it's an emotional issue. It's not something that you can purely analyze in the political realm just through logic and philosophical, because all these other things, become a part of that.
And I know it's allowed up to 15 weeks in cases of like rape or incest or human trafficking. Do you think the fact that like proof has to be shown of criminality in those situations makes the bar too high to the point of people that might need it in those situations don't end up getting it?
Well, I think the legislature, when they craft legislation, they do it in a way that they think is going to effectuate the intent of what they're doing. I will tell you that we have not necessarily seen some of the parade of horribles that people had said in that particular issue with that. And the reality is, look, there's a lot of pro-life people that will say, yeah, incest is terrible, but it's still a life. So they were mad that there was an incest exception. I think our legislature is like, listen, we want to save as much lives as we can. We want to make sure that we're doing that in the most prudential way possible that could actually stick long term. And so they made those decisions, as they did.
I'd like to talk to you about tragedy, and like you have been through, personal life challenges of your own on the death and on the cancer front, even going back to your mom's ovarian and breast cancer back in the day. Like, what was that like for you back then going through?
Well, I was in elementary school when my mom had it, and I didn't really know what was going on. Like I just remember going to school and people all of a sudden, very concerned with me and my family. People were bringing food over to the house, and something had changed. And then she was in the hospital. She was going through the chemo, and I just remember it just like was really, really tough. I didn't really understand what that was. I think I was in second or third grade at the time. But when you see, obviously, a family member going through that, I mean, it's not pretty. And then when my wife did it, it was the technology had gotten better. I think the treatments had gotten better. But that was very tough as well. And I think with both my mom and my wife, I mean, we were a young family then. I mean, I was in elementary school. My sister was probably pre-K or maybe not even that. And then when my wife got it, I mean, all three were 5 and under of our kids. And not that it's ever like not a big deal when someone gets breast cancer, but a young mom in particular, not only is her life in the balance, but the whole trajectory of her kids and her family and everything. And so I think it's just, it adds weight to the situation.
How did having the experience of what you went through with your sister with the pulmonary embolism at 30, in a way kind of prepared you when you found out what was going on with your wife?
I don't think they were as connected in that respect, but I think what it did, my sister was very sudden, right? She was just living life. She was going over to the UK, frequently. I mean, that was her boyfriend was there. And I remember coming back from church one day, my mom called me, said she was in the hospital, that she had some type of clotting. And I was like, and it seemed like she was stable. It didn't even occur to me that you're in the hospital being treated, right? I mean, it's like, I just didn't see.
And your mom's a nurse.
And my mom's a nurse. So it's like, when you get admitted to hospital, it's obviously not like it's a small thing, but it's like, and then, like a couple days later, they said she passed. And so it was really shocking. You don't expect something like that to happen. And I'm not saying like, you want someone to have like a long illness before they die, but there was really no preparation at all. So I think for me, it was just like, you know what? There's nothing guaranteed in this life.
Right.
You just don't know what's going to happen. And so, make the most of it. You don't want to look back and wish, I had done this, I had done that, or anything. And it was a wake-up call for me. I was always driven. I always worked hard and everything like that. But to have that happen so suddenly, I mean, it was almost like, how could this be?
And your parents, I mean, the cycle of life is, you don't bury your
Exactly.
child.
I mean, and so, it's obviously very hard on them. To have something like that happen. So here, this shows my wife's character. So this happens in London, right? And so my mom and me, need to go over to kind of do whatever you have to do, bring the body back, claim it. I had never been in that situation. So I'm in my congressional office in Washington, D.C. She's down in Florida. The problem is I didn't have my passport. My passport was in Ponte Vedra Beach at our house. And Casey's like, I'll go with her. Like, don't worry about it. I'm going to go. So Casey went with my mom to be able to tend and do all that at a moment's notice, took off work, did it, and then came back. And then we did the funeral and everything after that. But it's just, those are difficult circumstances. We've had, both of my grandmothers, I grew up with to a certain extent, and they passed away. And not that that's not sad, but it's like, you're 80 some years old. That's just different than somebody all of a sudden dying when they're 30. You really feel the tragedy there.
How do you get through it?
Well, at the time, I was more probably concerned with my parents than I was with me.
Yeah.
I did feel, because she had been in our area for a certain time after college, and then she got a job in North Carolina. So probably the last maybe 2 years before her death, she wasn't as involved in what we were doing in Florida. We didn't see each other as much. But you don't think anything. Life takes you different directions, right? And so I was just like, well, should I have been doing more at the time? Because we did visit her in North Carolina once or twice, but I was like, should we have gone up more? Should we have had her come down more?
Like you start to beat yourself up
a little bit, just because you don't get a mulligan on this one, right? And it's so that's it, and you're not going to be able to have those experiences again.
With your wife, the First Lady, she was telling me how with her breast cancer, it was reported in a way that you wouldn't think it was as big of a deal as it actually was, because she said it was a rare form, it had spread. When you kind of first found out about that, before you called all the doctors and did all the research yourself, you're thinking what?
Well, so she said she had a discomfort, and my response is, you're fine. Like, that's just how I am. I'm like, you're fine. There's no way you would have a problem, right? You're healthy, you're active, whatever. She's like, no. I was like, all right, well, then go see your doctor. So she goes to see. The doctor does an exam and clears her. And so she comes home. She's like, yeah, they said I'm fine. And I'm like, oh, great. And she's like, I don't know, though. I don't feel. And I'm like, because for me, if a doctor said I'm fine, I would never think twice about it. I'd be done. I would never. She just had a feeling. They didn't give her the mammogram. And she just had a feeling that she needed to get a mammogram. And so I was like, you're fine. The doctor said, I told you you were fine. The doctor said you're fine. And she just fought. And I'm like, okay, we got to get you a mammogram. So we worked to get the mammogram. And you're waiting for the results. And she's just like, look, you take the phone call. I don't think it's going to be good. And it was either the doctor or someone at the facility calls and said, he's like, listen, look, she's not going to die. But here's the details, all this stuff. And yeah, so it wasn't like, stage 1. I mean, it had spread. But they're like, we have good way to deal with this now and everything. And so then I had to tell her, and it was a really, really difficult situation, partially because no one wants to have that happen to them. But I think more for her is she look and see the 3 little ones, right? I mean, that I think was what really made it tough. And I'm not saying it would ever be a cup of tea, but when you've got 3 kids 5 and under, and you're the mom, and now you're staring down this, which could potentially even take your life, it just adds a weight to it. And so it was really difficult. And I said, all right, we're gonna get through it. And I started doing research.
And you're the governor at the time, and COVID is going on still.
So we had that in pretty good check, because this is probably October of 2021.
Okay,
and so,
but still, I mean, it's...
Yeah, no, it was a crazy time. There was all these things happening, so we did that. And so I was like, all right, we're going to do it. Now, the good thing is I have a lot of friends around the Florida country. People are telling me like, oh, I know this guy here, I know this guy there, I know this guy. So I was like, look, we've got a place in Tampa. Let's go there. Let's get the assessment. So they kind of gave me assessment. Here's what we think we need to do. Here's this. Start whenever. So I started calling these other guys. I'm like, here's the diagnosis. Here's what they found. Here's this. What do you think? What do you think should be done? And they all said exactly the same thing as the Moffitt Cancer Center said. And so we went through with it. And you got to go through chemotherapy. You got to go through radiation. You got to go through all that. And that's not an easy thing to go through. And she didn't always not that she didn't want to hear it, but I don't think she was as confident as me. But I'm like, you've got this. I was like, what you're going through is going to be a 99% success rate. Like, you're going to do well on this. I know you will. And I did believe that after talking to all these doctors. And so she went through it. But anytime she'd go in for a scan, it's like, you kind of just hold your breath, and everything has been good since then. But that kind of got her on the kick of like, okay, what am I putting into my body? How did I get the breast cancer to begin with? She didn't necessarily have a history of it in her family, so she started thinking more about how can she be as healthy as she can be.
What was the lesson learned through all of that for you?
Again, don't take anything for granted. You just never know. There's going to be curveballs in life. Be very grateful for what you have. I mean, you could have a great wife and great kids one day, and then something can happen. Maybe it happens to you. Maybe it happens to one of them. I mean, obviously, she would have been willing to go through that so that our kids wouldn't have that, just as I would have been willing to go through it so she didn't have to go through it, and she would have gone through it so I didn't have to go. That's just kind of the way you think when you're in these situations. But
and get a second opinion, too, if you really
Well, that's
feel
the thing. I mean, I think that she fought for herself more than probably most patients would. And had she not done that when she did it, it would have become more and more symptomatic. But then the question is, if she had waited 6 months, what would the prognosis have been? And it may not have been good.
Running for president, what do you think you learned going through that?
Well, I think there's 2 things. One, it was just a unique situation because you had a former president running. And so it wasn't like you're running against other governors or senators, right? It's like he had a certain hold, and then they were indicting him all the time. And so our voters see this abuse of the legal system to go after him, and that really created a strong base of support for him that was really immovable and emotional. I mean, I'd have people in these early states tell me, you are going to be a great president. I think you're going to be better than Reagan. I'm for Trump this time, but I'll vote for you next time. Well, obviously with that, that's just a difficult mountain to climb. If someone thinks you could be a Reagan type figure in the Republican Party and they still ain't voting for you because they're voting for Trump, you just know that. So that is just one thing that was just unique. If it was just people that hadn't been president before doing that, it would have just been a much different scenario and environment. But then just nationally, the media is way more important in a presidential than it is in like a statewide. Florida is kind of like a mini presidential because we have all these different constituencies. You go to the Panhandle, it's like southern states. You go to Miami, it's more Latin America. You go to Palm Beach, it's like New York transplants. Southwest Florida is Midwest transplants. You've got all this stuff happening. And you got to be skillful to be able to navigate that and do well. And obviously, I had the biggest victory in the history of the Republicans in Florida in 22. But a lot of that can be driven by me going out there, running commercials, doing that stuff in terms of talking about my record. When you start getting into a national, you've got to engage in the media landscape. And it's very dynamic nowadays. I mean, you know that more than anyone. How do you get known by people who may not, you can go on Fox News, although Fox had kind of gone, on the other side. They weren't necessarily giving me coverage at that. They had made that editorial decision, which is fine. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. Do you go on this podcast? Do you do this? You do that? Just running commercials in a presidential, that's not enough. So what's the approach to the media? My approach to the media prior to that in Florida worked very well because I'm like, you know what? These legacy media, these are partisan leftists. I ain't dealing with them.
I was going to say, you had a bit of a complicated relationship.
Well, I'm not dealing with them, and they're going to ask me questions, and if they ask dumb questions, I'm going to hit them, I'm going to do that. And then I had the whole conservative ecosystem. Yeah, Governor, that's our man. And they would elevate you. When 60 Minutes tried to do a hit piece on us, which was bogus, and they got big time criticism for it.
I saw you went after the correspondent in real time.
Well, and what happened though is you had Democrats coming out in Florida saying this is a lie. Like the idea that somehow they did anything wrong by working with Publix was a lie. And so it's very rare that you would get opposition politicians coming out to the defense of someone in the other party, but it was that bad. But I had Fox, I had all these people coming out to my defense. Anytime the media would try to do a hit job, I had this whole thing. Well, when you get into the presidential, a lot of those people were either silent or they were backing Trump, right? So I had to engage with those, and I didn't realize that until much later. But then towards the end of the process, I'm doing town halls on CNN. I'm doing stuff with NBC. I'm doing all this stuff, and I do think that that's something that you have to do. You just have to be out there. Who cares if they ask you unfair questions? That's just the nature of it. Honestly, we're at the point now where people hate the media so much. When they ask an unfair question, people don't like them for doing it, right? They want substance. And so to be able to do it, and so just think where we are now, where we were 4 years ago when I got reelected, media landscape, to 2024 changed, and now it's changed even more.
You were obviously leading for a while,
Second behind Trump. I was never beating Trump.
Well, but
I was the one guy that they thought could potentially give him a run.
What was it like for you, just kind of on a personal front, when the outcome wasn't what you were hoping for?
So I had all this stuff, the media and how that played out. Some of it I should have engaged, some of it, I had people in kind of the right side who had been for me before, who I wasn't getting play from. So I'm like, well, how the hell do I get any traction? So I went to Iowa and I was like showing up at places. I'd meet with like 20 people at a time, right? Trying to say, okay, let's build it from the grassroots. And then we had Iowa and, I came in second place by a considerable distance. So I'm just looking at it and I'm like, you know what? I had so many people tell me, we love you. We think you're awesome. We think you're gonna be president one day, but we gotta go with Trump. And so you either accept that message or you don't. And so I exited, I endorsed him, and I just moved on. Literally the next day, I'm out doing press conferences here about my legislative agenda for that.
Oh, come on, it has to bruise the ego a little
not
bit,
really.
though, right?
It doesn't because
you busted your ass for a long time to get to this place. You're a competitive
It
guy.
is what it is, though.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. It's just you'd have to know what you can control and what you can't control, right? I saw when they started indicting him, I saw his numbers go up. It just was what it was, right?
To what extent do you think you should have been more aggressive in attacking him?
Well, that's the thing. So we're friends now.
Yeah.
He tells me, he's like, you should have attacked me. He's like, you never attacked me. And part of the reason I didn't, honestly, I like him. I know when you're in the he'll throw pot shots at you, whatever, but that's all just politics.
Well, you're kind of between a rock and a hard place in going after him too,
well, that's
right?
true. So once he was getting the lawfare, I think people felt like, this guy's being persecuted by all this stuff or whatever. But he has told me, he's like, you should have attacked, you should have attacked. Honestly, the reality is, I was aligned with him, in his first term. I was aligned with him on most of his major policies. We did have a difference over COVID. I mean, he obviously kept Fauci on. I was a big critic of Fauci. So there were some.
Well, and when he said he won the 2020 election and not Biden, like you said, President Biden won. So it's not as if you've always fallen in line.
Well, but
with
that's actually one time where I criticized him because the CARES Act had the mail ballots, right? Like, I'm not a fan of mass mail balloting. I think that is a problem. I think it was a problem in Georgia. But he signed the bill, and I said, well, wait a minute, he signed the bill. But be that as it may, I mean, the reality is you can either just sit there and say, oh, woe is me, I didn't win. Or you could just say, you know what? And I saw the writing on the wall. I mean, let's just be clear. I knew I'd probably come in second in Iowa. The question is, could I come in a strong second and then maybe have the coalescing? And when it was more of a weak second, it just is what it is. I mean, we were projecting 200,000 people in the caucus. There were 100,000 that showed out, so half of the turnout showed out. And I think it was because some of the people that maybe would have been open to us, they just thought it was a fait accompli. They didn't even think it was worth participating in. They're like, Trump's going to win it. So it is what it is. So I felt endorse, go back to getting things done. Because, I'd done a lot in the 6 months after my election into the May of 23. We did a heck of a lot. And then I was running from like May of 23 until January with the caucus. And so I just kind of picked right up where I left off and then just kind of moved forward. But I just don't think not everything is going to work out in life. That's just the way it is. I had a great resume. Certainly Republican voters they appreciated what I had done. They thought I would be a good candidate or that. They just thought it was his time to get another shot. That was just the nature of it. There really wasn't anything I could do to change that.
What do you remember from the December 2017 Air Force One flight with him?
Well, so, he had been somebody, I didn't really know him before he got elected. I campaigned with him in 2016. But I watched The Apprentice. I mean, I always thought when I was a kid, if you asked me who's a rich guy, I would have said Trump, right? He had a big brand and a big persona, and I was positive on it. I know some people aren't. I was positive on it. So he gets in, and they're going after him on the Russia stuff, which was a hoax, right? But at the beginning, Washington believed in the Russia collusion. Official Washington believed. A lot of Republicans in Congress, Democrats in the bureaucracy.
Although, in fairness, I will say, at the beginning, you would listen to how he would talk about Russia and President Putin, and it would have you scratching your head a little bit. That
may be true in terms of how he approached it, but that's a separate question of whether he was doing collusion, right? So I'm going out there saying, there's not collusion. And I was one of the few. I mean, you had maybe 5 or 6 of us. And, he would call me and say, hey, thanks, I appreciate that. Because he was not getting a lot of support. Now, like every Republican, it's like, oh, collusion, all this other stuff. But at the time, those investigations were actually launched by Republicans. House investigation, Senate investigation, and then Rosenstein put Mueller in to do the Mueller investigation. So I developed a relationship from him with that. And so, he was asking me, what do you want to do, all this? And I said, well, I may run. And so I just said, here, would you do a tweet for me? And he's like, I'll do a tweet. And nothing happened. Then 2-3 weeks later, he put out a tweet saying this guy would be an amazing governor. He's a great guy, whatever. And then that kind of gave me some added credibility. The people that knew me in Florida, I was their guy, right? I mean, but I was one congressman of 27. And so then you start to kind of do that. So yeah, I mean, it just is what it is.
Elon Musk, your presidential campaign was originally announced on Twitter. You've worked with
That's
Elon
another lesson learned, though, what to do. Do a standard announcement. And here's the thing, too. I don't even know why I agreed to do it. I mean, I thought maybe it would do. But when you have a beautiful wife and beautiful kids, you need to be out there publicly so people can see that. And so that was a big mistake.
Okay, the flip side is, if you have Elon Musk approaching you about the idea of doing this, that could be attractive also in the moment. And I know you guys have worked together with Starlink and hurricanes. How about the most interesting experience you've had with him?
he's probably the best entrepreneur in the history of the country when you look at the diversity of things he's been able to do and do very well. You know, Henry Ford was great, you know, all the way up. But like this guy, he's flying rockets, he's building cars, he's doing the internet, he's got tunnel company, he's got all this different stuff. And so he clearly is just wired on a higher level than most of us mortals. And, you know, I'm educated. People think, you know, so I was like, when you're dealing with him, he definitely is at a higher level. There's no question about that.
Can you feel that when you're talking to him?
I think so, yeah. I think so, yeah. I think you could tell he can think of things, he thinks of things, I think, in ways that are a little bit deeper and more analytical than your typical, even very successful person. But he's a guy that gets things done. So our hurricanes call him, hey, we need internet after Hurricane Ian.
And is this you reaching out to him directly?
Oh yeah, he sends all the stuff. So you know, because you have to have the thing on the ground that gets the satellite.
Like portals
so
or
we're
whatever.
able to like link all these businesses up to this. We have our emergency. We have all this stuff, and that is really good internet. I mean, honestly, it's as good internet as you're ever going to get. How he does that, and so that's just become part and parcel of what we've done in emergency response. And so he's played a big role in that. So I think I have asked him, why build Teslas in California? Do it in Florida as well as Texas. You know, there's an inertia with this though, right? I mean, if you have all this stuff, I get it. That's the one thing we've never had really is auto manufacturing in Florida. I think we'd have some good places to be able to do it. I know he's got a big foothold in Texas. He's talked about doing things in the boring company in Florida with some tunnels. You know, that can be tricky in Florida, although we do have a very nice one that goes out to the port of Miami, very expensive. That happened before I was governor. His are a little bit smaller, a little bit more economical.
I want to talk to you about your personality. First, when I was talking to the First Lady, she called out your memory to me. I was talking to your first Chief of Staff, Shane, who is convinced it's photographic. Your thoughts?
I don't know that that's true. I think, like, for example, when I meet people, like if I meet somebody who's from Sarasota, they come up to me and I'll do their name. If I go back there, I will remember. If I see that person in Montana or something, my brain is like, well, wait a minute. I know you from here, and it doesn't compute as well. So there's certain things I do. Things that are important, like important facts, history, whatever, that I really key in on, I think that I retain very well.
And have you always been that way?
Well, I think I've been that way, but things that are not necessarily important, I may not notice some things that some other people notice about, I don't know, like, I mean, it's like I walk in, I'm not gonna like worry about what you're wearing. It just doesn't matter to me, right? There's some people, they will walk in, they will know the belt that you have on. That's really important that they key in on all those things. For me, it's like, you know, I'm not trying to like pick somebody apart or anything. It's like, okay, you know, you're the guy that wants to get this done for the state of Florida. All right, I'm there, I know what that means, let's get it done.
What does your average workday entail?
It's very dependent on the time of year and what's going on. So for example, we had the Surfside Tower collapse in South Florida, 2021. So I get a call at 3 in the morning saying this condominium collapsed. I'm like, is it bad? Well, we're finding it out. Then like 2 hours, it's bad. I was like, all right, I'm going down. So I get in the plane, I go down there. Oh, apocalyptic sight of rubble. But yeah, there's rescue operations. So we're there coordinating all that. I do a state of emergency. We get with that. I'm meeting with families. I fly back, come with Casey and the kids, put them in bed, sleep. 6 in the morning, I'm back out, fly back down there, do it. And we did that for like 2 weeks straight where we're just doing it. Hurricanes, you know, I'll be out, the prep, we're in the emergency operations center, 3 or 4 days out probably. We're there full throttle, storm hits. We have our guys go, I'm going to highlight different things, going to talk to people, and that can go. And we had 2 in a row back to back in 2024. So we had about a 6-week period where we were kind of nonstop with that. Now we're in March, the legislature isn't in session now. You know, I'll go down, I sign legislation in the heartland of Florida. We'll do different things. So it can vary now.
But you'll like start your workday when and end it when, typically?
Well, it's interesting. I'm usually up before 6. My wife tells me I should get more sleep, that the sleep's good, but that's typically what I usually go to the gym. And then I'm usually heading to the airport, and then we're flying to where we're going. If I'm doing the office, then I'm usually getting into the office around 8:30. But if I'm flying out, usually we're wheels up before then. And so we go to different parts of Florida to do different things. Sometimes I'll bring money, sometimes I'll sign bills, sometimes I'll meet with people. We're very active getting around the state. I think it's a mistake to just be in the state capitol and this is what you imbibe, because this is the political class up here, right? Those folks are not the same, and not that they're bad, they're just not the same as somebody who's trying to make ends meet, somebody who's trying to keep a business afloat, somebody that's trying to pay their way through college, and that's what you really have to do. So, I show up, I go to Wawa, I go to all these places and just show up, and look, I take a lot of pictures with people, but I will hear things from them. And if I'm in Fort Myers and I hear it, and then I'm in Seminole County and I hear it, and then I hear it if I'm hearing the same type of stuff, then I know this is something that we need to be concerned about. And so you got to get out of the Capitol and you got to be out, especially in a big state.
When does the day end?
Sometimes it'll end. I mean, last night my day probably ended at 9:30 p.m. It just depends on what you're doing.
Well, where I'm going with that is, from what I understand from talking to people close to you, you work kind of around the clock, right?
We are. I mean, what I've learned over the years is, like, if I'm in the car or I'm in the plane, I try to just knock it out for a little bit, right? I mean, like, you got to pick your time. You can get 20 minutes in a car ride, you get 30 minutes in a plane. I've learned to be able to take a nap anywhere. You can put me in all these situations and I can figure out how to do it. So that's a way to kind of just recharge.
In what ways are you difficult?
I mean, I can be impatient. I mean, it's...
that looks like what?
Well, I want results, right? And I want the bottom line up front. So, like, if you were briefing me and you may be saying a lot of great things.
And by the way, Shane, your first chief of staff, was telling me how he would always warn staffers before going in with you, if you don't know something, tell them that and you'll look it up. Don't.
Exactly. For sure. But so it's like, so if someone is going through, like, I know where they're going, right? And I want to just get to the point and do it. And sometimes that's fine, because sometimes people may need to be more concise. But it's also the case where, you know what, maybe they're going to spin it a little bit different, that listening to the analysis may do that. And I'm just like, okay, what's the bottom line? Let's go, let's do it. I think by and large it serves you well. But I also think, there are times when, you gotta let people say their piece a little bit more. And it shouldn't just be you have 30 seconds to go and go from there.
Two criticisms that have been tossed your way before. You've been called thin-skinned before. You've been called a bully before. Your thoughts?
Well, I think when they say bully, it just means I'm an energetic executive. I make big, strong, resolute decisions. So if I remove, like, a Soros prosecutor, they will say you're being a bully. No, I'm using my executive authority under the Constitution to relieve someone of their duty who breached their duty to the public, and I'm making sure the people are safer as a result. So there's this idea that if you wield lawful power, that you're, quote, bullying people, when in reality, I'm discharging the duties that I've done. The thin skin, I think that's absolutely not true. I don't listen to criticism. I am not online doing anything like that. I mean, just think about COVID. That was an international feeding frenzy against what we were doing in COVID, day after day. If that was something that got to me, I wouldn't have had the fortitude to stick through that.
When the criticism your way during COVID was at its absolute worst, take me to that moment and what you remember and what you're thinking at the time.
I got elected to look out for the people that I was elected to serve. It's not to protect my own political hide. I was taking a beating, but I believed in what I was doing was right. I had studied the data, unlike most other governors, and unlike a lot of these people that would go on CNN that were supposedly experts. And I had to care more about their jobs and their livelihoods and their kids' education than I did about protecting my own job. So I didn't know how it was going to work out politically. I resigned myself to doing what's right, because you know what? I would rather be true to myself and earn the indemnity, the ridicule, and the criticism of others than to be something I'm not and have dislike of my own self when I look in the mirror, right? I needed to be able to look in the mirror knowing I was doing what I believed for the right reasons, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. And so I had people, well-meaning, supporters of mine calling me, April, May, June of 2020, you got to do this. Oh man, you just, and it was like, because what I was doing was so different from the narrative, but the narrative was just wrong. I mean, that's just the reality. The idea that it was controversial to say every kid in Florida has a right to be in a classroom in person if their parent wanted. We said if the parent didn't want, they could do virtual. Although I don't know that there was 99% of the time they should have been in, but it's fine. And it was almost like we were, sending, they would put coffins outside the Department of Education building, the teachers unions would do. That was wrong what they were doing. That was not, that was hysteria. This went off the rails. So we were doing was right.
But it's easy for somebody to think that at the time when
that's all you're being told.
When everybody else, all the other states are doing one thing, and then.
But the question though, what was the underlying data telling us?
And what did you see that made you realize I'm going to do this?
I saw an age stratification in COVID mortality. In other words, very little COVID mortality for people that were young. And of that, it was usually people that had really serious health issues anyways. And again, that's not something to sneeze at, but it's like, you're not going to shut all the other kids out of school over that. And then even the elderly, a lot of them had comorbidities too. So you did that. So that was one. The other one was antibody studies that showed, Stanford did one. A lot of people had the antibodies, way more than we thought. So you had this case, we've documented an infection. There were 100 times more people with antibodies. And so that told me that you're not going to be able to contain this thing. You're not going to be able to eradicate it through non-pharmaceutical interventions, that this was something that had already spread enough, and we can't shut down society. Certainly in those, if you had like the Black Plague, and it was like, one person has it, then to quarantine an area or something so that you didn't, you could have that conversation, but this is something that clearly had spread beyond just a few thousand cases. And so, but what that also told you is the mortality rate was lower than what the World Health Organization said it was 3.4%. Well, I mean, if you have 3.4%, if you have 100 million that eventually get infected, that's a massive death rate. Reality, that was the case rate. They knew certain infections and then they did the mortality. They didn't account for all the people that had asymptomatic infections. So I saw there that the mortality was more consistent with a severe flu than it was with like a Black Plague or something like that. And what's interesting? February of 2020, there was a piece written by the CDC director, I think the director of NIH, and Fauci, basically saying we think it's going to be more akin to a severe flu based on what we're seeing. They were right then. Something flipped to where all of a sudden shutting down the world became the answer, but it was never justified based on the underlying data. So as a governor, I'm being told I have to do all this stuff, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, don't I owe it to the people I represent to actually convince myself? Don't I have to look at this stuff, data and all that? And what I found was there were actually people that agreed with what I was saying. You just couldn't speak out at the time. Social media would take you down if you criticized lockdowns or masks or anything like that. There was massive censorship going on. So that was that. And I was getting pounded in the media. And then what happened was, the days go by, weeks go by, months go by, people are like, oh, shit. Florida's still standing? They told us you could, why don't we do like Florida? Heck, we want to go visit Florida. Hey, we'll move to Florida, all this stuff. And it shifted probably 6 months to where, hey, you can go to Disney World in Florida, but you can't go in California. You're on the beaches in Florida, but the cops will chase you down if you're jogging on the beach in California. How is that? So you had continued negative media, but then I think what happened was the lived experience of people trumped what the narrative was saying. And it would be interesting because I would literally have like universal, oh, you're doing so good. We wish you had you in California, because they were doing well in Florida. And I'm like, it's interesting you say that because one of your sister companies, MSNBC, is saying how bad I'm doing. They're saying California's better. Oh, no, Florida's doing it the right way. So you saw that evolution of that. And I think, look, I can list you off a lot of things about Florida. We've had #1 economy 3 years in a row. We've had more income move into this state since I've been governor as ever moved into another state in all of American history. I can talk about all these different things. I don't think that happens without taking the stands that I took early in COVID.
Really?
I don't.
Why?
I think we were bucking the narrative to such an extent that it was attractive for people. And part of this was the George Floyd and the rioting and the crime that we didn't allow happen too. So it was kind of the COVID misery and how those blue jurisdictions were doing, and then not keeping the community safe. I think those two, we were such a contrast because, we've always had lower taxes than these places. That's not anything new, right? How come we didn't have the same flood then? I mean, we did have some, don't get me wrong, but the amount of income and the amount that moved in over a few year period, that's unprecedented in American history.
What are you looking to do with property taxes?
Well, we're looking to give people relief from the high cost of living. I mean, we've had a major inflationary period in American history, one of the most inflationary. Groceries, all these things. Who knows what's going to happen with oil? The one thing we control is tax. And so in Florida, local governments get property tax. We don't get it at the state. We've got a plush rainy day fund. We've paid down half our debt since I've been governor. I've got all this great stuff. We're doing great. Local governments, when I became governor, were taking in $32 billion. Now they're taking in $60 billion. So the revenue's almost doubled in 7 years. Why? Because they're assessing the values higher, and the values have gone up. And so we're saying, okay, if you're a Florida resident and you're homesteading your property, that's your primary homesteaded residence, we think that should be excluded. Now that's about 30% of the overall property tax revenue if you just did it on day one. That would take you back to like 2022 levels of spending. So sometimes people say, oh, you can't get rid of all property taxes, you won't fund services. Well, I agree. If you got rid of all of them, you'd be in that predicament. But we're in a situation where we can do the homesteaded properties. If you have Airbnbs, you can still be taxed. A rich guy from Brazil buys a place in Coconut Grove, that can still be taxed. The business commercial, fine, it can still be taxed. So it's got to go on the ballot in November of 2026. And it'll be something that would be phased in most likely. But we could get to a point very quickly in Florida where 90-some% are not paying anything, and eventually we'd phase in the elimination. So it can be done, and if we don't do anything, they're going to have $84 billion in revenue in 2031. So that's 12, 13 years to go from 32 to 84. So when people will say, you can't do it, you're not going to have any services, just ask them, did we not have schools and police in 2019 when they were taking in $32 billion? Of course we did. Now, give them inflation. Give them population growth. Give them a couple percent just for kicks on a Saturday night. That takes you to about 46 or 47 billion. It doesn't take you to 60. So how would you want to do that? Maintain the growth of these governments or give Floridians really historic property tax relief?
How do you view the balance between federal and state government?
Well, I'm a constitutionalist, and so James Madison in Federalist 45 said the powers delegated under the proposed Constitution, because remember, he was arguing for the Constitution to be adopted, are few and defined. Those belonging to the states are numerous and indefinite. And we've gotten away from that as a country because the federal government has grown over many, many years, both in terms of the scope of its power and also the size of its spending prowess that it uses in various ways to reduce the autonomy of states. But on day-to-day issues, when we had the hurricane in 2022 and the hurricanes in 24, FEMA was not on the front lines. We were on the front lines. The local emergency responders were on the front. We are the first line of defense. When people are committing criminal offenses and they need to be prosecuted, taken off the street, that's a local sheriff or police department that's handling that. Things like education, all the things that affect you the most in your daily life are at the state level. Now, the federal government's tried to intrude on that over the years, but we have a huge responsibility to maintain. And that's why I think, because of the federalist structure, that's why I think you've had so much differential in population migration, in wealth migration, because you really do have laboratories of democracies, right? You are going to see New York approach things in a certain way. I mean, you had the governor there a few years ago saying Republicans should leave New York State, that they didn't want Republicans. Now she's saying they should go back so they can pay taxes to New York State. probably a pretty tough sell, right? So that's one approach. There's an approach in like Illinois where they eliminated cash bail. I don't think that's been successful. I think most people don't. But you have the ability to elect people to be able to adopt policies that are going to be very meaningful for your quality of life. And I think people have voted with their feet very resoundingly over my tenure as governor in Florida. And it's not just Florida, but we've obviously been the focal point.
How does what's going on with AI and this AI Bill of Rights play into what we were just talking about?
Well, I think so. If you look at the founding fathers, what they did with the Declaration and then the Constitution, if you look at the underlying philosophy, there's nothing new under the sun. It's as relevant today as it was then. Yeah, they had horse and buggy. We have chatbots. Yeah, they had wrote with a quill pen. We have all this technology. But what they were doing, they were diagnosing human nature. They understood there were flaws in human nature. They understand because of those flaws, when power is concentrated, it's apt to be abused. And so they built this architecture to make sure that you didn't have a consolidation of government power. I think if you apply that to artificial intelligence, these are companies that are exercising more power over our society than any companies have ever exercised in the history of the Republic. And so I think the founders would be concerned about, okay, you're doing this, a chat bot, you're putting in information and you're getting an answer. Well, that answer is only good as what the data set that they're using has. Human nature is flawed, right? So whoever controls those data sets are going to have an ability to manipulate what we even perceive as reality going forward. And that power, if left unchecked, it will be abused. The founders would tell us it will be abused. So I think it has implications for governance. I mean, it's got a lot of implications for jobs. You know, there are some people that are really accelerationist on AI, and they say that it's like a good thing that it's going to wipe out all these jobs. I don't think most Americans think that's necessarily something we should be subsidizing, right? I mean, technology is what it is. It's disruptive. But do you want to put your thumb on the scale in favor of it if it's going to end up displacing people? I think people have a lot of concerns about that. There's also a lot of concerns about how this interacts with children. And unfortunately, some of these chatbots have done things that are very, very troubling in terms of sexualization with minors, goading them into committing suicide. Why is that happening? Because these are things done by human beings. They are going to not only exemplify the flaws of human nature, but in many respects, magnify the flaws. And so what I've proposed is like, listen, we got to be eyes wide open about this. We don't just say, like, let the tech companies do whatever and the states can't do anything. That is not a viable pathway.
And that's where
forward.
there's, I guess, some disagreement, right? Whether this is regulated at the state level or the federal level.
Well, here's the thing, though. Does Congress have the authority to pass a federal statute providing a framework for artificial intelligence? Yes, they do have the authority. Have they exercised that authority? No. Will they exercise that authority? I think almost assuredly they would not be able to agree on what should happen with that. So in the interim, should states be kneecapped from doing it? That's what they were trying to do in the summer of 25. Basically say states couldn't touch AI for 10 years. So what we're doing is, and even the Trump administration has acknowledged the child safety, transparency, that does not stifle innovation. And to the extent it's stifling going after kids, that's something that we want to stifle. But I do think it's going to be, from a consumer perspective, is what you're dealing with real? Do you have a real person on the line? Is what you're seeing in a commercial real? I mean, they could take you and put words in your mouth and put you on TV saying the opposite of what you actually believe. Should there be recourse for that, or is that just fine? So there's all these different issues that I think arise from this. And so what we're proposing is, let's just have a framework where children are protected, parents' rights are respected, consumers have disclosure about what they're dealing with, but that if AI is used to harm you, that you have an ability to have legal recourse. And you're going to see this become more and more. And here's the thing. Those companies, their job is to make money, right? They're publicly traded companies, maximize the value for your shareholders. I got no problem with that. That's how our capitalist system works. But that incentive for them to make money is not the same goal of what's best for America. There may be some times where that could coincide, but is their goal going to be to get as many people, including kids, subscribed so they can sell ads and subscribe? Of course it is. That's just what they have to do. So I think as policymakers, we have to recognize that, mediate it, and say, okay, let's make sure this technology develops in a way that's going to enhance our experience as human beings, that's going to reinforce our values as Americans, not in ways that are going to displace us or undermine the human experience, are obviously going to be conflicting with our values.
As we wrap, for the first time in a long time, the path is less defined for you come 2027. What's that like?
Well, it's interesting because I've got a lot that I'm doing now, so I don't really have a lot of time. I get asked about it a lot, but I am not like, oh, I got to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. I want to run through the tape here and be able to see the rest of this stuff through.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be able to say, you know what? We had 8 years, and show me someone that's been more consequential. Because if you think about it, we could talk about all the policy. I talked about, well, we're number one in this, number one in that. But when I took office, so it's great to do good policy, right? You want to do that. And you don't do it for political reasons, but if you're making tough decisions, if there's a good political payoff, isn't that a great thing? Some people will do the right thing just because it's the right thing. Most people in elected office will do the right thing if they think it's better for them, right? Well, when I took office in 2018, we had 300,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. We were the quintessential swing state. 1-point race year after year. That was the norm in Florida. I won re-election 4 years later by 1.5 million votes. It was the biggest Republican victory in the history of the Republican Party in a governor's race in Florida. Now we have 1.4 million more Republicans. So what we've shown in Florida is, if you have a solid foundation of the principles, the conservative principles to me are the principles that this country was founded on. You got to apply them differently today than they did then. But I think the principles are enduring. And if you have that foundation and you're willing to pursue policies with courage and conviction and really be bold and draw a sharp contrast, people will respond. We've moved the electorate. We say we're in this divided country. We were the quintessential example of a division in Florida. We were 50-50. Everything was a pitched struggle. And then now we've been able to move it in a direction. Why? Because we produced results. And so I think that's something that's really important. I'm mindful. I've got more in the tank. We're going to be doing Everglades stuff. I got a lot I got to continue doing on all that. And so we're going to run through the tape. And then when the dust settles, we'll be able to do. But people will see me. I'll be active in one way or another. Certainly politically, I can tell you for sure there's 2 things that I'm doing now that I'll continue to do. And that's trying to get the states to certify amendments to the Constitution, term limits for Congress and a balanced budget requirement for Congress. And if we did those 2, I think it'd be very good. So Florida's done it. We got 28 or 29 states for balanced budget. We got 13 or 14 now for term limits and being able to do it. So I show up, I testified in front of the Kentucky legislature a couple of months ago. I go to Montana. I've been to these places, meeting with legislators, telling them they have the opportunity to do this, because I think what's happened, nobody has confidence in Congress anymore, right? Like, you don't even think that they can do it. Well, I think you need to change the incentives, and I think term limits and balanced budget will do that. So I'm going to continue to be involved in that, and there'll be a lot of other things that we'll be involved with. But the time for that is once I've run through the tape.
On the personal front, what's it like, though, for it to be kind of open?
It's exciting. I think doing 2 terms, people are like, we should get rid of term limits so we want you to stay. Yeah, but you know what? If there wasn't term limits, I probably wouldn't have had an opportunity to run, right? You could have someone be here for 20 years. So I think 2 terms is enough. I think that I can say everything I promised I delivered. When I sat there the first day, I looked around the office and I'm like, I don't know what SOB is going to succeed me, but they're not going to have much to do because I'm going to get all the meat I can off the bone. And we've done that. So I think it's good. But I think it's really, I think, exciting to see, okay, I'm kind of no longer in this position. I'm going to have more freedom to do a bunch of other things. The one thing I think both my wife and I have talked about is, you're here, this is the governor's mansion, and it's nice, but that's not really it. Our oldest daughter was 2 when we moved in here. Our son was 9 months. Our third wasn't even born yet.
And when was the last time an actual family had
It's been a
lived
while.
here?
Yeah, it's been a while. So I think it's like not even about being governor. I mean, if we were living in like a suburb of Orlando for these years, just moving, out and going to a new, it's a change, right? I mean, so this is kind of what our kids know. This is their frame of reference. So we're thinking about it more towards them about, okay, what does that mean for their schooling? What does that mean for this? What does that mean for that?
There obviously have been news stories about the idea of your wife, running for governor. I brought it up to her yesterday, and she's like, "I'll address that at the appropriate time."
Well, here's the thing. I mean, like, she's never wanted to run for elected office. It's just not what she's aspired to do. But when people see her out there, you're not going to find a more articulate spokesman for conservative ideas than she is. You're not going to find somebody more telegenic than she is. She's flattered that people ask her and that they see in her leadership, but she's also she's got young kids and she's a mom and she puts a lot of work into that. I do as a dad too, but she's able to do things with that. There's certain things, it's like if we're going to go in the front yard and hit baseballs, my kids want me throwing them the baseballs, right? Like, no, they don't want mom throwing. But there's other things, they want mom instead of dad on doing things, right? So it just is what it is. That's about what parenting's all about. The wife and the husband, they complement. So, but this is prime time for their upbringing, right? And we've been able to manage it well on this. But I will tell you, having the kids be so young, running these campaigns was easier than if they were teenagers, because they don't know any of the stuff that comes your way, right? They don't know what they're saying about, oh, your dad's this, your dad's that, because the reality is when you get out there and you put yourself out there, you are gonna get so much stuff, and 99% of it is total bunk, right? But if a kid is hearing, a 13, 14-year-old kid, that may be something that wouldn't be as easy to deal with. And so having done it then, I think they've had a good experience. But that's, I think, more of just the family life is going to shift.
When Pete Hegseth's Secretary of Defense confirmation was looking dubious, there was talk about how you might have been under consideration then. Likelihood you would ever take a role in the administration?
Well, during that, I was never offered or asked for anything. I know my name got thrown out there. It's never anything I've aspired to do, but at the same time, like, I'm a service-oriented guy, like, if I can be beneficial. So I would never rule anything out. But I would say when you hear my name ever mentioned, that's just people trying to create fodder. It's definitely not me trying to position. It's just not something I've done, partially because when I endorsed the president in January 2024, I was like, okay, I got to do this, I got to do that. I got a lot of stuff in this job. And so my mindset has always been that I'm here doing the job, not trying to get an appointment or anything like that. Just, running obviously in your own right, that's a little bit different if you get elected, but trying to get an appointment when I'm already in this position, it's just not something that I've really tried to do.
And then your close friend Mike told me, I hope he takes a minute. Like, he said, Ron deserves a break. He has earned that right.
Well, it's interesting. We don't really talk about kind of like, what we'll do in terms of just like for fun that would be different than what we're doing now. Is there something that we've wanted to do that maybe we can't do? Because, the reality of this job is you have security detail. If I show up somewhere, it is not unnoticed. Let's just put it that way. We didn't do any vacations from the time I got elected till the time I got reelected. I mean, it was just one thing after another. So to get reelected, I was like, you know what? My wife and I, we're going to do. So we go down, we go to the Keys, we go to this neat place, which is like viewed as like very private. We get there, we go to check in. I take 2 steps. Governor, can I do a picture? I'm taking pictures. Within 5 minutes of being on that, and she just kind of rolled her eyes. It was fine. We ended up having fun. But it's a little bit different, right, when you're doing that stuff. So I'm still going to be known, and maybe I'll even still be out there, but to be able to maybe not have the same level of bubble and all that other stuff, and to be a little bit more normal. Because it's interesting, when you're running for governor, you don't have security. Like, I had to provide my own, and I didn't really like to do it. I'm like, why would anyone care? It's a crazy world. I'm glad I did it. The night you get elected, my opponent conceded, I walk out the hotel room and I have the security on me. They follow me to the speech. They follow me back to the room. Sir, what time in the morning? I'm like, what do you mean? We're going to take you to the airport. They take you to the airport. We fly back. We're in Ponte Vedra Beach in Northeast Florida. I wake up the next morning to go for a run like I would do in the neighborhood, and I've got SUVs following me, and I've got guys jogging with me. I'm like, this is a little bit different, right? I mean, it's really just that your life does change. And so we've managed that well, but I also think like being able to maybe get out of that bubble a little bit, may be good for us and the family.
Thanks for doing this.
Thanks a lot.
And that's a wrap.